Okay, okay, now we are now recording, so we can now start.
Yay!
Um,
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
What the folks who don't know, once you hit the recording, we've been like jabbering for the last 20 minutes. Good jabbering, like just sort of catching up with one another and talking about all kinds of things, tarot. One of the things I wanted to say is that I'm totally like a tarot nerd, right, in that sense. And I'm like, I was looking on Facebook. I was looking at Facebook groups other day, earlier today, and so they'll suggest other Facebook groups, right? So you guys know what I'm talking about. And so they're suggesting all of these different tarot groups and stuff. And I was like, they're so cool, And so I applied for a couple of them, and I haven't got anything back yet. But I'm always really curious to see what other groups and how they're developing that kind of thing. But it struck me as like, you know what? Maybe the more appropriate title for this group is, San Antonio Tarot Nerds or something like that. Maybe more appropriate, to what it is that we're about, right? Which is that sort of dive deep. So I love that, this deep study. So I was going to say that today is our second meeting of two meetings. And moving along through the tarot, we're now working with the magician and the magician's energy, the magician vibe. A dear friend who I went to graduate school with, whose focus was philosophy of communication, did his dissertation on vibe, like the vibe of a room, right? And so he posted something earlier today, and he talked about his research area has a real strong interest in vibe. Right now he looks at sort of social movements and justice, social justice and social movements. That's kind of his area of focus, but he's still really into vibe, which I think is really cool. So we're going to be sort of vibing with magician energy this evening, and taking a little bit of a closer look. And like I posted earlier in the week, maybe it was late last week, earlier this week, I don't remember. It's only Tuesday, so it had to have been last week. That the primary kind of focus is this kind of discussion, reflection, discussion, um, in a way that we can learn how to narrate each of these cards, the meanings as we understand them, hook them into our lived experiences, and make them really come to life for us, right? There is a kind of narrative knowing that we have about these cards, which is why I think that they were so attractive to Carl Jung in terms of developing his archetype theory, right? This idea that there's something there that may be deeper than we understand. So I really wanted to, I just wanted to say that before we sort of launched into the magician. And I know Kurt has put together this kind of beautiful jam board on all of these different versions of the magician, and also found a couple of spreads. And I'm like, I love those questions and those spreads as not just questions in a tarot spread, but really sort of journaling questions, reflection questions, ways that we can sort of crack open the magician even more, and find our way in even further. So, with that said, what I would like to do is to actually I'll just pull up sort of our basic general sort of magician, and we can take a look at our magician here. But hey, Kurt, can I share my screen? You'll have to
Uh,
let,
yeah, let me
you'll have to give me,
figure that out here.
click on participants down at the bottom,
Right. Participants.
and then hover over my name, and then the option more
Make.
should pop open.
Yes, I do. I want to make you co-host. Okay, you should be co-host.
Let's see, it usually gives me a little, let me see if it'll let me do it. Yay. Um, I'm going to go ahead and share this with you just so that way you have an image. This is not the only image. This is the most, I think, one of the most basic images here. So let me just share that. And okay, let me do a couple things here. All right, so I just wanted to Wait, I don't like the way it's looking on my screen. Hold on. Okay. So we're all familiar with a pretty standard Rider Waite kind of image of the magician, right? And so I just wanted to remind us, not that we need it. I think you probably have decks. I know CJ, you had several decks last week, and I'm loving on the Dreaming Way Tarot.
Oh,
I love this deck.
so glad you have it too.
I love it. So Kurt, this is an awesome deck. Anyhow, if you're looking
The
to buy
dreaming.
a physical deck, I would call it maybe kind of a semi-intermediate deck, sort of beginner intermediate. It still has a lot of reference to the Rider-Waite imagery, but it's a little more abstract. It's leaning in the abstract kind of direction. But anyway, I just wanted to, I'll stop sharing just to remind us there, and I'll hold this up. But what I would like for us to do, let me go ahead and just like we did last time, the questions to open up today are, just take a couple of minutes. Let me get the chat going here. You've got your,
Oh, yeah.
I know your hand is,
Yeah, we're going to have to get a hacksaw.
we're gonna have to do something with your hand. But anyway, let me post it. We don't even have to, CJ, if you don't want to journal, because I think your injured hand is your typing hand, your dominant hand. We can also, since this is being recorded, we can also just call those out too. So why don't we take just a couple of minutes? Whoopsie. I'll set my timer for 2 minutes. Take a moment to kind of just think about this question and what comes to mind. I journaled it a little bit earlier today, so I can pop those in the chat. I had to let my dogs out. Did you guys hear my beeper? So 2 minutes to reflect. I went ahead and put some words in the chat there, things that come to mind. So, but I'd like to open it up for this first prompt. So what are some of the things or words, what words come to mind when you look at the Magician card?
Kurt, you want to go or you want me to go?
Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, so I wrote all tools that are needed are here and present at the magician's for him to have. Grounding, focus, alchemist, conduit, divinity through inspiration, powerful, knowing, but with focus and grounding. That knowing has to be paired with those.
Could you repeat it? I'll type them in the chat. Alchemist.
Alchemist, conduit,
Okay.
divinity through inspiration, powerful and knowing, but the knowing has to be married with focus and grounding.
Those are cool. I want those to be part of the chat. I know they're in the recording, but I think that would be awesome. Yeah, I see. I mean, definitely power, right? Ability, that sense of confidence. You've got tools and you know how to use them. You know, that's the thing that pops out to me. It's like, I'm choosing the wand right now, but I could have chosen any of these, but I also know which tool to use in which situation or circumstance, right? Because just because you have a whole bunch of tools doesn't mean you need to be using all your tools. Although, haven't we all, I don't know about you, but I'm guilty of that. I'm like, I have 5 tools. I only really need to use one, but I'm like, I want to play with all 5 of them. I was like, I want to show you. It's sort of like I get excited, my poor students, right? Because I get excited about a new app that supposes going to deliver content even better, make the experience more richer and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes I just end up overwhelming them, right? So this is what I mean. It's like learning how to use these tools and being very, very selective. What attitude or approach to have in a particular set of circumstances. I think a manipulator, and I mean manipulator in it's not, oftentimes we use the term manipulator is in a very negative kind of connotation, with a negative connotation. And certainly we're like, oh, that person is so manipulative, that kind of thing, right? That there's some sort of, the outcome of that is to make you do something that you don't really want to do, but somehow you've done it anyway. People will think about sales people, or whatever, but I think the used car salesman is that sort of negative idea of manipulator. But I really mean a manipulator, one who, could do that, right? And certainly in an upside down sort of state. But also this idea of being able to put and set into motion. I had a colleague who just retired, and I would say that the magician card, she embodies that magician card. She knows exactly how to look at a context, set certain things into motion, and get the outcome, and is willing to use her influence and her power, pull out the right tool for the circumstance or situation. And so she's a masterful magician in that way. And having talked to some of my colleagues, they sometimes will say that they felt manipulated, right? Especially if you sort of gotten in her way, she'll find a way to work around you, so there's a part of it where I deeply admire her and this, because I'm watching it unfold. But there have been times where it's like, damn it, what just happened, right? So having been experienced that, so I have deep admiration for her ability to understand the political, what she needs to do, like looking at all situations politically, perhaps, and knowing what to do in those particular circumstances to in essence, manifest what she wanted, right? To bring about what it is that she wanted. So those are the kinds of thoughts and ideas I have about the magician.
So, so you both said some key terms there. Denise, you said play, and CJ, you said conduit. So, I've done a lot of research on the magician, but just looking at the image, of course, the immediate image is this. I don't know if but the right, and there's an archetypal. There's an archetypal encoding there, which I can talk about, but just from culture, right? If you see that, what comes to mind is Saturday Night Fever.
Oh,
right. And that makes and that's kind of glib, and we can laugh about it, but in fact that's actually the purport to the magician card in a way, because John Travolta's character in that film, just like a musician, a brilliant musician, just like a brilliant poet or or teacher or somebody, what makes them so brilliant is that they look like they make it look as though it's effortless, right? They make it look as though it's completely effortless, when in fact there's a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into making it appear effortless, right? Whether it's Ian Anderson playing the flute, or Ray Charles playing the piano, or an absolutely masterful professor. Like, I had a professor in graduate school that was so beloved that he just let anybody come to his class. He didn't care if you were enrolled or not. He was just like, come in and, and I actually studied with one of the founders of sociolinguistics, and he would come in the classroom with no shoes on, and he would put his big bag. You can't do this today because but he would take this big bag of stuff, and candy would just spill out all over the desk, and he would say, "We may not learn anything in this class, but we're gonna gain weight." And there was no grades in this class. We just had to write a letter to him at the end of the class and told him what we learned. And I promise you, I learned more in that class than I did in any. Okay,
Right.
that's and I guess that's more indicative of the fool. But there is, and this is kind of what. So I guess we could talk about the iconography of this, what he's doing in the Rider White. So he's pointing up towards Keter, which is the first sphere of the tree of life, which is the origin, right? The first understanding of the divine, right? That we can even begin to conceive of. That's Keter, which is light, which is brilliant divine white light that we can't even look at. And then he's pointing now to the first, to the womb, to Bina. He's pointing downwards to that. And so he's taking the divine light, and he becomes, in essence, a birth canal. He or she becomes a conduit, right? To that womb, right? To that divine feminine womb. And in the Rider Waite card, what we see him pointing downwards, and we see those flowers growing up. The flowers growing up are indicative of that creative energy, manifesting, right? That's the manifestation there. But and he's also using the wand, which is, we don't have to get, but that's the male sex organ, right? And of course, the number 1 is the erect phallus as well, and so on and so forth. So we get into all that, but there's also this element of the magician as a charlatan, and Rachel Pollack writes a lot about that. In Western, and particularly in Western understanding, we get very hung up on, we got to cast a circle, we got to do this, we got to do that. But if you look at, Native American shamanism, if you look at, any kind of shamanism, really, if you look in, in India and other places, they don't worry about that. And she argues that, maybe we should really think about that, that taking on more of that aspect, right? And so in her deck, as we'll see in a moment, right, she's got a shaman there, wearing a tribal mask and stuff. And the story that she relates with that is that the shaman will pocket, when the shaman goes to do a healing, the shaman will pocket a stone, right? And then we'll do the healing, but then we'll pull that stone out as if it's coming out of the person's body, right? Wants the person to believe that stone is coming out of that person's body, right? Because that's even though it's chicanery, right? That person that sees that stone and thinks it's coming out of the body, that's a physical representation of that illness or whatever it is leaving the body. So it's that connection there. Very much like in Roman Catholicism, when we get with the confession and the priest, does the words of absolution and all of that. That's the physical manifestation of, the, okay, you're forgiven and whatever. And so there's a psychological, kind of thing. If anybody's had that experience and you get one of those, like, okay, now go say 30 Hail Marys or something, then that's a totally different scenario. But there's a lot to be said. One piece I read said that, the definition, because magician comes from the word make, that Latin for make, which is where we also get magic, imagination, all of those digits, it's all comes from the same root, right? And believe it or not, I didn't take Latin, um, uh, but anyway, so he's in that realm. But what separates the magician from the fool, there's a key element that separates the magician from the fool. The magician still has that play element, because he's got to be willing to, he or she's got to be willing to play with the tools, and get dirty, if you will, get in the dirt and play and do that. So there is that relationship with the fool. The difference is that the magician, what characterizes the magician is the capacity to concentrate without effort, right? And so that's what you see in the virtuoso musician. That's what you see in the artist. That's what you see in the poet who's controlling a room, with that's what you see in Johnny Cochran. I mean, who else could stand up there and say, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, right? Nobody else could pull that off but Johnny Cochran, right? I mean,
and it resonates so much because the word is virtuoso, the virtuoso.
Yeah.
That I think is really an important descriptor, because it is that person who's put in what is it, the 10,000 hours,
Yeah.
It also has a little bit more than 10,000. I mean, the 10,000 is just like, yeah, you're expert, but this is like even beyond that, right? This is this kind of this deep settling of comfort of comfort with one's ability to make these things happen.
Well, and the root word of virtuoso is virtue, right? The root word of virtuoso is virtue.
Yes.
Right. And that really, the whole idea of ethic, and beyond virtue, right? Underlying virtue is love, right? And love is absolutely essential. If you're going to be, if we're going to allow ourselves to be a conduit of the divine, we must be in a state of love and recognize love and have that perfect love and perfect trust, or at least be opening to receive that. Because the shadow side of the magician, and I'm very concerned about the shadow side of the magician, because the shadow side of the magician is the narcissist, right? The shadow side of the magician is the article that I posted in the group about people in various alternative communities just completely being unempathetic, and and us versus them, and conspiracy theories, and all this kind of stuff, and ultimately, Donald Trump is pretty much the example of the of the shadow magician.
Wow, that's cool.
I mean, because he says make America great again, but does the exact opposite, right? And in that, I would say in my life for the last 30 years, that has been the anxiety of my life, is the shadow side of the magician. That, if I say something, if I'm intent upon something and focused upon something, is the reverse of that going to manifest, right? Is the shadow going to overcome? You see what I'm saying? Because I mean, if we
I'm really
because if we
I was going to say,
I'd like to hear what he has to say more on that real quick.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Say that again, Kurt, about
because
shadow side manifesting if you focus on something.
No, well, because it depends. Well, and it also, of course, depends on personalities and stuff. And for those of us that have, certain things astrologically and other things, our shadow sides can be more difficult to deal with. And so, like for example, the other day, and it may be the cause of more anxiety. And so, anytime you're doing something, at least for me, anytime I'm doing something, there's something in the back of my mind that says, well, what else is being carried in that statement? What's the inverse? But I got this card the other day, so I have the dark goddess, and I got Lilith, right? and I forget what number she is or whatever. I'm sure we'll get to her at some point. But the gist of the card of Lilith is that, you know, it's all right to have negative thoughts. It doesn't mean that, you know, you know, just because you have a negative thought or doesn't mean you have to act on it, or doesn't mean it's going to manifest. And I think that is the absolute pathologically narcissistic characteristic, if you will, of the quote unquote new age movement as a whole. You know, if you're going to lump everything in the new age movement, is this whole idea of, you know, what you think happens. That, I mean, yes, if you think about something and you put it into action, and yes, that's true, but ultimately what can happen, you know, is somebody can look at that and blame blame the victim, right? Like if somebody has cancer, for example, you know, somebody can say, oh, well, they just didn't want to heal themselves, or they
Right,
didn't,
right.
you know, exactly, you know, and that is as bad, if not worse, than pray it away, right? Which is what they say in African American community and in Pentecostal communities and other communities, right? It is dangerous, it is pathological, and that's the shadow side to the magician,
Of the
right?
magician is narcissist. Well, yeah, no, I mean, I
Because
want,
yeah,
well, what I wanted to say is that what we've got here is there's all of that. And what I wanted to say earlier was that ability to create a kind of smoke screen, and to create a diversion, right? There's a diversion that the magician is able to create as a narcissist. And they do that in different ways. It's sort of the rhetoric they use in order to do that. And I wanted to comment about the shadow self, you know, because there's this one thought that, well, essentially Jung said that the shadow was the life unlived, essentially, right? So that we have the narcissist in us, right? It's just the right set of circumstances, which is what you were saying. The caution here is to be attentive to that and to be aware of that. And what happens and what set of circumstances arise that you can, I mean, you can let your narcissist out. You know, the narcissist is like out of the cage. Right? How do you befriend your narcissist and make that sort of healthy? That may be part of the lesson of the shadow of the magician in reverse. But yeah, it's I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
well, and according to, you know, tarot theory, the magician becomes reversed when one is the conduit, but one instead of releasing the energy, holds on to the energy.
Yeah.
Right. So the energy, the divine spark within that should be released and thus multiplied, right, ends up being held within and ends up essentially destroying the conduit. You know, because the conduit, we are not meant to hold that energy. We're meant to gift that energy, right? Through creativity, through whatever. But if we hold it in, then yeah. I mean, and I don't use this example much anymore because it's dated, but I used to quote Cat Williams to my student. One of the definitions of magic that I read in relative to the magician card was that magic is making something out of nothing. And that's exactly what Cat Williams says a pimp is. A pimp makes something out of nothing. And he uses the example of Kevin Federline, that Kevin Federline was a backup dancer and he ends up, you know, marrying Britney Spears and, you know, and so on and so forth. And then he got Britney Spears alimony, you know, palimony or whatever. So, you know, he made something out of nothing. And when I explain rhetoric to my students, that's what I say: you make something out of nothing, you know. But that's ultimately what the magician is doing. And it's interesting because depending on the deck, right, some decks have the magician in mid magic, right, in mid, you know, operation. Other decks have the magician just before the magical act. And to me, the just before the magical act speaks is a slightly different message, because, you know, to me, that's like, you know, I've been teaching 22 years and I get stage fright every semester, like before every semester, like I've never taught before, you know. And so that's like, you know, you know, all, you know, like CJ was saying, you know, all the tools are in place, but he has to utter the incantation or whatever. So everything is set, but it, but the incantation has yet to be uttered. And so that's another sort of example of that, I guess.
I was going to say that, as we were talking, I don't know, you can see that this magician card here in the Dreaming Way Tarot, right? So the hands are in the pockets,
Ah,
but all of the tools are floating around, right? And so one could say that this is one who is manipulating and allowing them, he's sort of levitating these tools, right? Without once doing this sort of dramatic sweep up with the arm, and I'm taking in love from, I'm a divine conduit, right? This is a very kind of quiet sort of,
Very quiet.
very quiet magician. And I think this is really very interesting, right? Again, I mentioned last week that we're watching The Mandalorian right now and watching Baby Yoda develop. And, and so the way that Baby Yoda sort of manipulates his surroundings in this sort of very quiet way. But I would love to, it's 8 o'clock, and so I want to make sure that we have enough time, Kurt, to look at that
okay.
kind of collage together.
Let me see if I can get the screen share to come on.
And then let me let my puppies in real quick, and I'll be right back.
All right. Okay, so we'll wait for Denise to.
Ooh, I like the one on the left. I like the one on the right.
So the one on the far left, this is from the Robin Wood tarot, which is one of the first decks I had back in the day. Robin Wood was well known in the 80s and 90s for her illustrations in fantasy books and D&D books and stuff like that. But her paintings and so forth, they have you can get so much emotion out of it. And this was an example, like I was saying, of the magician, like being before the tools, but he's got the tools in front of him, but he's not necessarily, doing anything with them. And of course,
well, I like the expression on his face.
Yeah.
And the fact that he is in full ritual. I mean, he's wearing the antlers, the deer. He's got both the black and white candle. He's protecting himself. He's inviting the divine in. I'm in love with, now I have to go look at that deck.
That deck it's available for $18 on Amazon.
Yeah, I have that deck as well.
It's a great deck. And of course the deer is of course a reminiscent of Cernunnos and Hearn and so forth. And so, and then in the center, let me do our pointer. This has a pointer on it. I just have to find it. Oh. This is okay. Yeah, I do have the pointer on. Okay, so in the center we have the Shining Tribe. So this is the shaman, and he or she is just got he's just out there connecting with the divine in a very sort of kind of wild fashion. Here is and I didn't read up on this version, but this is from the Druidcraft Tarot.
Yeah. So
we have the Rider-Waite stance, but of course it's amid standing stones. And I just like the artwork on that one. So this one here, this is Hermes, and you can tell the wand that's on the stone there is Hermes' wand. And Hermes is indelibly connected with the magician because that's the astrological attribution to the magician card is Mercury, right? But also also the idea of rhetoric, the idea of communication, and the myth, the narrative that goes along with the magician. I've seen this like repeated in several tarot texts about the magician is baby Hermes, actually child Hermes, stealing the cattle from his brother Apollo, and then him talking his way out of being punished by Zeus. He essentially talks his way out of it, you know, using rhetoric to keep himself from being punished. In fact, he ends up being gifted with with sort of the purview of divination, right? Um, uh, and so that's, and also the other attribution with Hermes is that, and this has to do with the creativity, it has to do with the artist, it has to do with the poet, it has to do with all of these manifestation, these magicians that we see in our reality, right? That don't necessarily recognize themselves as magicians, but they're the conduits that we see, right? Is that Hermes looked at a tortoise shell, and he looked at a common tortoise shell, and he saw a lyre, right? He created the lyre out of a tortoise shell. You know,
That's almost like, that's like looking at your resources, not quite sure.
Mhm.
You know, I often refer to my sister as being incredibly resourceful, right? So there were times in her life, her adult life, where money was very, very scarce. She was a single parent, and she made magic, right? She made things come together because she
Oh
was
yeah,
resourceful. She could see all of these raw materials that were sort of disparate, and then she was able to kind of put them together into this thing that was like, I mean, it's to this day, right? She's going to be 70 in March, and it's like, oh my God, even more resourceful than she was when she was, you know, younger. It's just, it's really quite amazing. So that
yeah.
really,
I have
yeah,
a friend who raised 3 children on like $20,000 a year.
yeah,
I can't even I can't even fathom that.
I can't, yeah,
You know,
yeah, exactly.
I can barely live on $41,000 a year, and I have myself and my dog. I mean, come on. So yeah, absolutely. You know,
What did you say Hermes was gifted with?
he was gifted with divination
Oh, okay, that's right. Thank you.
because yeah, I'm pretty sure he was gifted with divination. I have to look that one up again.
I'm gonna
Uh,
chat, but we can confirm it.
but so, and then we have Merlin, and I thought this was obviously from the Arthurian tarot, but I thought this was interesting because we saw Merlin in the last week in the Chrysalis tarot as the Fool. So we see Merlin as both the Fool and the Magician. He has qualities of both, and it also shows how Merlin is, how the Magician and the Fool are so intrinsically related to one another that you can't really be a magician without that sense of wonder, without that sense of trust, and without that sense of trust in the divine, without that love of the divine and of what he's doing. You know, the difference here is that Merlin's reached a state of the state of concentration, this capacity to create, on the verge of creativity, right, on the threshold of creativity. And again, we have this looks more like Dumbledore, but this this deck was made. This deck was probably created before Harry Potter. But this is another Merlin image, right? So we have
Yeah,
two images.
sure.
We have two images of Merlin here. I tried to organize these thematically, and some of them are just funny. So here we have these are the ravens. So these are simultaneously the ravens of Caradwen and also the ravens of. I think it's Caradwen, right? Who has the ravens, or was it the Morgan? It's one of the. I think it's Caradwen who had the ravens, and also, but also it's Odin's ravens, right? And we're reminded of that. We're reminded of that because they have eye. They're eating. They've got eyes, and the eyes in the beak, and the eyes on the tree. And remember that Odin sacrifices his eye for knowledge, essentially for the ability to do magic. You know, so that in one sense could be seen as like a reminder that, you know, the 10,000 hours, you know, it costs you 10,000 hours to get to this point. And my problem, you know, when I was doing this stuff at 15, right? Because I started real young, and I screwed myself up terribly because I thought, oh, I can just do, you know. But anyway, and again, of course I love the this is the raven here in the center, creation, willpower, you know, willpower and concentration, basically synonyms. This is kind of funny. Timothy Leary as the magician.
Yeah, I saw that.
One could argue that's also the shadow side of the magician, because he said, "Tune in, you know, turn off to tune in, drop out, you know, and all that," and you know, without really understanding the without a lot of, you know, vision in terms of what that would mean in the future. Of course, most of the people that I've known that have done a lot of psychedelics, they say, you know, I wouldn't do them today, but I'm really glad I did. You know, I'm really glad I did. You know, it opened me up to the possibility of another reality. So there's Timothy Leary.
It's interesting because they're doing more research on psychedelics and its potential for healing
Depression.
depression
Yes, and
and
that's a good point, because when Timothy Leary, that's actually a really good point, because when Timothy Leary started out, as you all probably know, right? When Timothy Leary started out his experiments, they were extremely controlled.
Don't hate me, y'all, but I have no idea who Timothy Leary is.
He popularized LSD. He was like the LSD guru in the 60s.
Yeah.
But in the 50s, like when he was at Harvard, right? He would experiment. He would do very controlled and precise studies, which is what the magician has the play element on one hand, but also has the controlled, precise concentration element on the other. And so, in the beginning, Timothy Leary was you know, he was very, very precise, and he had extreme success with very violent criminals, you know, incarcerated criminals. And then he started throwing these parties at his house, right? And I studied Allen Ginsberg in graduate school. Allen Ginsberg was my focus, right? And Allen Ginsberg was at one of Timothy Leary's like first LSD house parties, and described just, you know, the randomness of everything. And you know, so from the house parties, it became, well, let's just mass produce LSD and give it to everybody. And so then, you know, and so on and so forth. So but yeah, you know, we see, you know, mushrooms have become legal in a lot of places now, and so on and so, because people are seeing the health benefits of it, and frankly, they're probably healthier than the psychotropic stuff that I take. Not psychotropic, but psychoactive stuff that I take legally, that I call my white people pills, because it keeps me bound to the white military industrial complex. You know, I have to be bound to the white military industrial complex to get my medicine every month, right? That's how it works. Okay, so here we have, this is a more traditional Rider White. This is Llewellyn Classic. So Barbara Moore, it's like her attempt to make the Rider White more dynamic. You know, everybody's kind of done a different. Says
Kurt, you keep freezing up. So can you start again?
Well, it says my internet connection is unstable. I can't end the meeting because it will get, yeah.
No, don't end the meeting. I meant like start on what you were saying about the first card.
So this is a Rider White. This is like a more traditional like Rider White image. You know, they tried to jazz it up a little bit, make it a little bit, show a little bit more movement. But he's basically the magician, the Rider White. It's interesting they put roses here instead of lilies. Well, the lilies are on the other side. The roses are probably a little bit more appropriate iconographically, because lilies are masculine, generally associated with masculine flower, particularly in Christianity. They're associated with Saint Joseph, as opposed to roses being associated with the Virgin Mary. So that's, you know, so that's cool that they added roses in there. These next
and it echoes the red and white, the purity and the worldly knowledge and whatnot.
See, that's beautiful. I didn't even get that, but yeah, no, you're absolutely
right. It echoes
right.
what he's wearing, so the purity and then his worldly knowledge with that, and now he's in the position he's in.
Yes, absolutely. That's beautiful. And
develop along the way. And I'm just looking at sort of the position or the angle that he's holding his wand, and how different it is just from your standard Rider Waite, right? Even though this is kind of a Rider Waite influenced deck. And it just doesn't seem to be that necessity to sort of like exclamation point, sort of demark that.
He's
there is
very
this-
relaxed about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say
It's
there's this softer way that he's kind of holding it. Maybe that's comfort, right? That's I'm comfortable doing this or working in this circle or working with my tools and my skills and all of this kind of stuff. But it's just a very interesting, it's very sort of relaxed.
I'm kind of gazing at it right now, and what I'm getting at it right now is that I'm looking at that he's pointing at the roses, and to me, at least in this moment, it's as if, hey, this is what's important. The important is the roses. The important is nurturing the earth, nurturing reality. You can do all the flashy things, but if there's not, if there isn't love, if there isn't growth, then
we live, there's a grounding.
Yeah.
We live in this realm, we live in this this is our reality, or we live in this reality, or potential to bring about this kind of manifestation, right? Manifestation is physical, right?
Well, and a lot of the writings on the magician card that I looked at, they make that point, is that the fool is the realm of idea, the magician is the beginning of manifestation, and you can't, and if there's no manifestation, it really doesn't mean anything. It's like to use like an academic analogy, well, you can think about creating your project or whatever, but if you don't create the project, it's like, no, I mean,
I've got ideas. They're all up here.
That's a simplification, because I mean, I teach labor-based assessment, but even in the labor-based assessment, the student has to advocate for the quality of the labor that they put in. So they have to use the rhetorical magic to explain how they generated their ideas, even if their ideas don't show up completely in their finished project, right? They still
Thank you for that. You just explained to me why I got an F in art as an artist, and my work was amazing, but I failed that part, and now I finally understand it.
Yeah.
So apparently your teacher wanted you to write a lab report about your
No, we had to present verbally to the class.
Oh.
I was like, well, it's pretty, and I wanted to make it, and there it is. And like, I didn't get, but now I get. Thank you.
So it's
all about why.
This is the magic formula that I teach my students, and I'm going to give it to you for free. But this is what my students pay for. It's one of the only smart things I actually say in my class. I think it's smart. It's bullshit. But what description is, right, is to make what's incumbent upon an essayist or a writer is to make the unfamiliar familiar by way of the familiar, right? So the example that I give is I could tell somebody, I just had a conversation with a professor that looks like Peter Griffin, right? You may not watch Family Guy, and I don't anymore, but you may not watch Family Guy, but everybody in our culture, everybody's seen what Peter Griffin looks like. And so by virtue of process of elimination, you've already eliminated it to maybe 3 people on campus just by that statement. So you've made the unfamiliar familiar by way of the familiar. So anyway,
it's that thing in rhetoric where it's like, you've got to put it in a way that your audience is going to be able to grasp it. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and you've got to use things that they know. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that's why I told my student, they ask, well, can I interview somebody in Spanish? I'm like, sure, you got to translate it for me, but you can totally do that,
As long as you, because it's your ultimate audience. Yeah, exactly. It drives the language choice.
But so I love these, and I would have physical copies of these next 2 decks, but they are so freaking expensive. They're just absolutely, because they're artist produced decks.
I'm in love with the middle one.
Yeah.
I have the apps for these decks, and I looked up the artists that made them, and they are so freaking expensive. And they're like, I mean, the cheapest is like $50, And it would be like, okay, I have this deck, but I'm never going to do a reading with it with it ever, you know. But I really like the middle one, and I like the middle one because of the turntable. Okay.
Yes.
Now let me
Yeah.
explain.
The
So
pentacle is a turntable.
the turntable. Well, actually, I didn't even notice it's the pentacle. Yeah. And you know what the pentacle is, right? I mean, the pentacle. You know, we have it's it's the human being. It's a human being. It's
Like Michelangelo.
It's exactly. And I mean, in Western iconography, it's the 5 wounds of Christ, right? And the you know, and so it's the turning of the human being. It's the, you know, like you're saying, it's the jostling of the human mind, right? It's the Chewbacca defense. If you remember from South Park years and years ago, like, you know, when I explain Derrida, you know, I use the Chewbacca defense, and I use Public Enemy's Don't Believe the Hype, right? When I explain postmodernism. But I actually had a friend, right, who is actually a shaman, who is an honest to God, like crazy, like discovered he was gay in a Mexican prison, and he was in the Mexican prison for embezzling from a freaking monastery when he wanted to be, but and ended up. But anyway, the point being is he taught at a major university for like 10 years with no degree, except for the one he printed off the internet.
Wow.
That's a magician. There's a specific way that he did it that made it legal, but he printed off his degree off the internet. So anyway, you know, he taught, you know, and he had a following, like he had students that, but anyway, he took some of his students to see Derrida. This is before Derrida passed away, obviously.
Yeah.
And so the first day they were like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And so by the second day, like, you know, okay, whatever. By the third day, they were all mesmerized by what the guy was saying. And one of his students burst out, it's the Chewbacca defense. So if you remember South Park, it had Johnny Cochran with a Chewbacca doll and an Ewok doll.
Oh.
And he gets the Star Wars iconography messed up, but he says, this is a Wookiee. This is an Ewok. They both live on Endor. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And he keeps saying that. And then the heads of the jurors just explode. Right? Like, because he just keeps repeating the same. And honestly, like, that's what fake news is, right? That's the fake news is in the whole soundbite culture that we have, right? Stuff just gets repeated and repeated so much that, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Stuff just gets repeated and repeated so much until people believe it, you know. And but that's the shadow side of the magician. The shadow side of the magician is, you know, unchecked, unverified information on the internet. You know,
I posted a video. I posted a link to the video of the Chewbacca defense.
Oh, awesome.
So if you want to go back and watch the Chewbacca defense.
So the reason I like the turntable is, you know, if you know anything about the history of hip hop, in New York in about 78, 79, the city was just in complete shambles, and they had no money. They started cutting art and music programs out of schools. And the kids said, well, you know, we want to make music. We want to make music. So what did they have? They had old records and turntables. And they figured out how to make music. In fact, and some of those records were so valuable, like Kool Herc, who was one of the first DJs. And originally, hip hop was all about the DJ, not the MC. The MC would like shout out the DJ, right? And the DJ would do all the stuff because very few people could do it. It was magic, right? Very, very few people could effectively make music with just a turntable and records. But you know, like if you had a certain record, like James Brown's Funky Drummer, which is the most sampled song ever, right? Is James Brown's Funky Drummer. If you had that record and you could like hand it off to the DJ, the person, and then you get a shout out from the DJ. Whoever got that shout out knew that, you know, that person was then again, that the DJ was being the conduit of the magic. The DJ was then giving the magic to that person who was given the shout out, right? And so the person with the shout out then knew that he or she, whatever, they were going to get laid that day, right? Because they had been conferred the power from the magician who was spinning the record, right? So that very much, and then so that's where the Hermes comes in.
Can I make an observation about
Yeah.
this card? Okay, so I didn't even realize until y'all pointed it out that that was a turntable and that he's holding one of the records and yada, yada, yada. But now look at the needle for the turntable. It's coming from the light of the divine.
Ah, that's perfect. That's awesome. I did not.
See the black line coming from the center where
Yes.
the light from the divine is being broken into the triune?
Yes, that's beautiful. I love.
So-
Thank you so much. Wow. I love
So
that.
without that connection, you can't hear the music.
Yeah.
Yes, and without that, and you know, and you hear so many artists
You can't create it.
and people, creative people, when they get in the zone, they're like, well, I didn't write this. I just, you know, let it kind of flow through me.
Exactly.
And that's, you know, and there was this interesting argument, and something that I read is that the idea of intellectual property is actually counterintuitive to that. You know, like for example, like in Hermes Trismegistus, right? Nobody knows exactly who Hermes Trismegistus was, you know, but he put the name Hermes on his stuff because he felt like it was being communicated by Hermes, you know, and so forth, you know, and so and I mean, you can get into that with the whole idea of, you know, like in Wiccan circles, the idea of, you know, aspecting the god or a goddess or something, you know, something of that nature, you know, the same idea, being a temporary conduit for that energy, for that form. And here, of course, on our far right, we have Hermes literally.
I was going to say one last thing that it reminded me of. You were talking about, I was thinking it also reminds me of techno artists
Oh yeah.
who were like, you know, creating, like amazing the kind of stuff that they do with their looping and all that kind of stuff, that they're creating that in that moment.
Well, the best hip hop artists, some of the best hip hop and techno artists of all time were the Beastie Boys, because they could sample a piece of music and nobody could tell where they got it.
Yeah.
That's the real that takes that art to a new level. You know, I mean, when somebody sampled Funky Drummer, everybody knew it was Funky Drummer. But when the Beastie Boys probably sampled it too, but you couldn't tell. Like they were doing stuff where they were taking like one note, and you know, and that takes that to the next level.
So Kurt, real quick, it's 8:27.
I'm gonna keep. I have a couple more slides. I can keep going. Are you guys okay with keeping?
I'm good. And Denise, I'll throw in there that if we wanted to at least pose a couple of more journaling questions, that would be helpful to me.
Oh, we've got journaling questions at the end.
Yeah, there's some beautiful
I've
ones.
got questions at the end on this. Yeah, there's questions on this this thing, this Jamboard thing.
Maybe, look, Kurt, maybe what we could do, since it's so close to wrap time, because I'm gonna have to log off at 8:30.
Mhm.
Maybe kind of moving to those questions now,
Okay.
and
Let
looking
me-
at those questions, because I think that you have some.
Oh, cool. Okay, I have two of those. Okay.
Yeah,
I
they're
do want to
beautiful.
mention.
Oh.
I do want to mention briefly this elements card here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mentioned this briefly because in the Hebrew attribution to the magician is Beth, which means it's like the first utterance in the book of Genesis is the letter Beth, but also it means house, right? And it means community, right? So it's the idea of creating magic, creating change in community. And so I thought that this this particular card was very indicative of that. And it's a Wiccan deck, the Book of
Yeah.
Shadows deck, and so they're looking at it, you know, in terms of that type of community. But and then here it's another version of that Wiccan deck, and we have the magician as female here, which we don't often see. So that's cool. But okay, so our questions, and we don't have to necessarily answer these online if we don't have time, but and yeah, we didn't start exactly, you know, we started like 30 minutes behind.
And type, let me go ahead and I'll type these questions up in the
Okay, okay.
But are these the questions that we're looking at here?
Yeah. So what these are is it's actually, so in her in sequel to 78 Degrees of Wisdom, and I can't think of the name of the sequel book, but in the sequel book that she writes 30 years later, she has at the end of each card, she has spreads that you can do to figure out your relationship with that card. And so these are her spreads that she's created for the magician card. So if you were to draw a card, the first card would be, what is magic?
Okay, but are these our journaling questions?
Secondly would be, how does it act in the world? Yeah, we just put them up here as journaling questions, but you know, in fact, what it is they're a spread, right?
Okay.
So you can use them certainly as the spread, the questions in a spread. But I think they make, in fact, before I would even probably journal, before I would actually lay out cards, before I'd even go to my deck, I would just journal these questions first, right?
So
As journal prompts. Then I would go in and ask my deck, right? And
Right.
questions, and then do that. It's like, this is what I come with, and this is what the deck comes with. So I would use them definitely in both ways. So there are these two spreads. So I'm writing this up in the chat.
So my question is, did we have other questions earlier? Like last time we did 3 questions that were not from spreads. I don't know, Denise, did you create our questions last time?
I did, and I can go ahead and
Did we have other questions that you created this time or no?
yeah, they're actually the same questions, right? Because I think that
Oh.
we can keep asking those same questions. And the question we had at the beginning of today's class was one of the questions that I had asked last week. And then I've got 4 other questions, and I can go ahead and post.
Are
the
those
rest.
written down on a slide here?
They're not written down on a slide, but I certainly could. We could write them down on a slide.
No, just go ahead.
You know, what I was going to do is just put them in the chat.
Oh, great.
And that way, when we get to posting the chat in the group, you can have those questions there. But let me finish up the questions right now from the actual spread. Sorry, typing as fast as I can. Or how do I find it?
So Kurt, I didn't like these decks when you first introduced them to me, the Book of Shadows, the little bit I saw online, but these particular 2 cards make me in love with these decks.
I really like her interpretation of like the devil card, for example. Like she's got, you know, it really is, she's put a lot of thought into it. I mean, obviously, I mean, Barbara Mortar, she's made so many decks. Like, I don't even know how many decks she's made, but I like the concept. The blue.
And then I want to show you one more Raven card for the magician in a minute when we're done.
Okay.
Can you already see me right now?
I can't see you, all of your, I'm going to end my screen share because we've already, okay. I can see the top of your head. Okay. Oh, wow. What deck is that?
That's the Crow Tarot.
Oh,
I think it's just called the Crow
the
Tarot.
Crow. Okay.
Yeah, it's just called the Crow Tarot by MJ Cullinane. But, and so the Crow Tarot is harder for me learning to read just because, but even his wings are at a diagonal. He's got the red and white roses.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's got the divine light up in here. He's got the 4 suits
Cool.
for the elements.
And the crows are smart. Apparently, supposedly, the sort of urban legend about crows is that they'll beat themselves in the head with boredom if they get bored. So, all right.
I went ahead and put all of the questions, so they're in the chat now. So the making change, magic, and community. Oh, wait, it says a magician wisdom reading, and then it has the 5 questions, and then it says a magician personal reading, and then there's 7 questions, and then right underneath there it says journal prompts, which were basically the questions that I asked last week, and was going to, we can get to these, since we didn't get to them today in our class time, you can always take those and journal them on your own. But essentially, these kinds of questions will remain the same. They're the same basic questions, because I think that they're actually I think they do a pretty decent job of helping us to kind of start scratching that, finding our way in. And then Kurt found these wonderful spreads, and he sent them my way, and I'm like, these are so wonderful. And I would totally, I'm a journaler, and I would totally journal those questions before I even pulled out my tarot deck and started working with them that way. So
Now,
these
journaling questions of yours, 1 through 5, would we only be using those for major, or would we also be using those for minor?
I think you can ask them of any card in the tarot.
Okay.
I think you can ask them of any, I mean, are there other questions out there, and might there be some better questions out there? Sure. And I'm not opposed to having anybody sort of recommending or suggesting questions, and we can switch them up. But
I love these, but they seem very good for major arcana, and so I was just curious.
A lot of them more.
But we can always switch those up too. I'm totally not. I'm so open to that.
A lot of the more modern decks, quote unquote, part of what they're doing is they're trying to make the minor arcana more evocative, like doing more with the imagery. So the imagery might, they might get more out of the imagery.
Yeah.
Than say, for example, like the Crowley minor arcana or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. We can definitely switch up those questions. These, you're right. They're really, I think you can apply them to any card in the deck. I'll say that. But are there better questions out there that we could use for the minor? Absolutely. Right. So it's a matter, if you come across something like that, just send it to Kurt or send it to me, or just put it on our group chat, and we'll figure out, we'll make sure that we can.
These are awesome. And I like the idea of the continuity from class to class, at least during this part. Instead of throwing in random other questions, I like that continuity, because maybe this coming week I'll get proactive and work on the next card ahead of time a little bit more like that.
That's what I was going to say, Denise. When you when you create the event in the group, could you put the questions in the group so that so we can create our answers ahead of time? That would be great, actually.
Actually, I think that's a great idea. And in fact, when I create the next one for next week, what I'll do is I'll put that in the description.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And then that way, in the description of the event, folks can just have them there. And then I've just been pinning the event to the top of the feed. So that way, people can see it and be reminded. My friend Caroline, who, bless her heart, she fell asleep, and so she slept past the deadline. But she was going to join, and I would love, she will at one point be able to join us. She's also got some really cool, she's an artist. she's one of my colleagues who she's also teaches at the same college that I'm at. And so I think she would have, and she also has has created part of a deck,
Oh,
um,
nice.
done the majors, right?
I'm
She's
so
one of the
jealous.
designers. She did a wood burning. She did like
Oh,
wood
wow.
burning, the deck, like wood. It's
Wow.
gorgeous. Yeah. And it's like, you know, and I'm like, Caroline, and she's like, I'm like, where's your deck? She's like, oh, it's somewhere. I'm like, what do you mean it's somewhere? So anyway, but the point here is that this is going to evolve, and I really do think that any questions or suggestions, just toss them out there, and we've got to make this ours, right? So make it
Oh,
feel
yeah.
good for us. So absolutely. So yeah. All right. So
Okay.
I'm going to have to sign off, but it was
I'm going to stop
wonderful.
our recording before I forget.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt, for doing all of that. I love it that you brought